Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavin Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. Nice to be back with you again. And we are reading from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, the section on the pastoral Sri Krishna. And he just went through a little bit of explanation about how we love something because of the self in the other. Or you could say that love is the all-uniting force in the universe. It's the equivalent of gravity in the physical universe. It's what draws everything together. And it's because we all are truly one from the source that we find love in another. And so we're going to just go back one paragraph and begin with the paragraph that says, now everyone wants to be loved by his God.
Now everyone wants to be loved by his God, for from God alone he gets whatever is good and enjoyable here. So if he wants to be loved by God, he must have to be a little bit of a God himself. Otherwise, there's no hope of his being loved by God. That is the reason why our scriptures enjoin worship God by being a God. That is the reason why there is no essential difference between God and his devotees, except in the point of power. God being infinitely powerful, and a devotee possessing only a little power, that is the reason why in the most orthodox temples of southern India, pariah devotees are worshipped by the most orthodox brahmanas who, if they smell a pariah 2 miles off, must bathe and purify themselves by uttering the holy names of their gods.
So just emphasizing this idea that we need to be as much like that, or we want to be as much like what it is that we are loving as possible. And the reason for doing that loving is to be as much like them as possible. You know, it's interesting if you look at couples and even people and their pets, they begin to look alike. And so it's somewhat of a similar phenomenon. You want to be as much like the God that you're worshiping as possible. All right, let's continue with a new paragraph here.
If this be the case, the worshiper of a formless God must have to imbibe a little bit of the nature of his God. That is, he must have to be formless himself, so that he may be liked and loved by his God who is formless. And if he wants to be formless, he must have to go beyond his body. By going beyond his body, he must have to go beyond the world, which is only perceivable by the body. By going beyond the world, he will have to cut off all concernments with his beloved wife, loving children, his most beautiful buildings and gardens, his name, fame, and honor, his desire to ameliorate the conditions of his people. In short, anything and everything which he at present holds very dear. Since such is the case, let him go and consult with his better half, and if her ladyship allows him, and if he himself finds it feasible, let him cut off all commitments with her, with anything and everything which he holds most dear, and thus, if he can get beyond his body, he will really be a worshiper of the formless God. If not, he is merely a vain talker. his idea of an infinite formless God is nothing more than one's idea of infinite and formless space. If he's ready to consider this blank space as his God, I pity the poor man. He has not yet learned the rudiments of religion.
So, of course, this is a chapter on the pastoral Sri Krishna, so the emphasis here is on worshiping a personal God, and he's giving a good reason why most people want to follow that path is because it's very difficult to go beyond this world while you're still an embodied being. I sort of had a picture of becoming a formless blob like Jell-O or something. He was describing this, but of course that's not what he meant. He meant going beyond it completely, not just being sort of an amorphous blob like an amoeba or something. But that was the image that came to mind at first. But so he's making the case for why one would become a devotee of God and why one then has these stories and images of a God like Sri Krishna, because the Puranas paint a very beautiful picture of a very charming and endearing soul with all the nice surroundings. And so as long as we have some even a small attachment to the things around us in the world, this is a much easier path to follow than trying to transcend the body and worship the formless. I often tell people it's like trying to grab an infinite beach ball. There's nothing to grab onto. Your hands just keep slipping off. So trying to grab a hold of the infinite is an impossible task for us embodied beings, and we need something to grab onto. And so that would be, of course, the personal God. All right, let's read another paragraph here.
Now, as regards confining an infinite God in a finite body, I will only have to remind my critic that no one has ever been able to confine his mind in a human frame 3.5 cubits in length, and his mind is more akin to the real man than the body, so virtually no man in this earth is confined in his body. Mind is now here. I can at once send it to the sky, the sun, the moon, or the stars. Nay, it can be made to embrace the entire celestial sphere. As the sun is not confined in his luminous disk alone, but permeates all space, as it were, so through his rays, similarly, no human being is entirely confined in his body, since it is impossible to confine an ordinary human mind fully in a body. Is it not much more impossible to confine the divine mind of God in the body, which he assumes either playfully or for the sake of some of his devotees? So it is foolishness to think that we invest our God with a body. By so doing, we can ever limit him. Nothing can limit the limitless God. Although he may appear to be limited in a body, if Sri Krishna had been entirely confined in his body, it would have been impossible for him to show his universal form to Arjuna.
So that he's bringing up some analogies here to try to get us to understand how we can conceive of God in a finite image and yet still realize that God is infinite. A mathematical analogy would be to think of the number line between 0 and 1, and then think of all the reciprocals of all those numbers, and all those numbers go from 1 to infinity. So you have a representation of all the numbers as reciprocals in just a very small, finite part of the number line, 0 to 1, representing as the reciprocals of all the other numbers from 1 to infinity. So that's another analogy of how the infinite can be symbolized in something very finite. Of course, we have other examples of the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm, like your DNA. Every atom wrapped up in a tiny little DNA strand is all the information for your entire body. So it's a microcosmic representation of your macroscopic body. So we shouldn't be concerned by that difficulty. We're not thinking that God really is finite. We're simply taking a convenient symbolic representation of God that is manageable for our minds. All right, let's continue.
You want to take a turn?
Sure. Now, therefore, he who honestly believes in a God with a beautiful form, the very fact of his God being beautiful naturally attracts his whole soul towards him. He almost becomes mad after him and forgets all other duties in the service of his master. In the life of the author of the Sri Krishna Karnamrita, we find that he was very young. He was mad after a dancing girl, so much so that the dancing girl herself became struck with his intense love towards her, and knowing herself to be quite unworthy of such pure devotion, reminded him that if he had but directed the devotion towards the source of all beauty, the most loving Sri Krishna of blessed Vrindavan, he would have been one of his most favorite devotees of that time, with remonstrance going directly home to his heart, made one of the greatest devotees and best poets of him. Since a common earthly beauty has power to madden a man, is it at all wonderful that the divine beauty of God, the creator of all beauties, more than maddens that fortunate devotee who has been able to see and realize it? God is almighty and all gracious. This is unanimously admitted by almost all the religions of the world. Now, therefore, if a sincere devotee, honestly believing in the words of his scriptures, believes that his God is the most beautiful of all beautiful beings, and so believing, if his incessant prayers to that God is for only a sight of that beautiful form of his, can that God, if he be all-powerful and all-gracious, remain silent to the prayers of that sincere person? In the Gita, Sri Krishna says, "Whoever wants to see me in whatever light or form, I fulfill his desire by assuming that form." And this assertion is exactly compatible with his all-gracious nature. And that, of course, is the idea behind the deities as well. Just as we can picture God in the form of Sri Krishna, we can also picture God in the form of a particular god or goddess. And God will then take that form for us to fulfill our desire to see God in that form. And this story reminds one of Bilvamangal, which is a famous play that Girish Ghosh wrote with a similar theme, where the man was so so attached to going to see his illicit lover that he forded streams in the middle of a terrible storm and tried to get over this wall in the middle of the storm, and went through all sorts of difficulty, practically died in the attempt, and she gave the same scolding to him. You know, with such devotion, if you had that devotion to God, you would have realized God by now. And so then he became a devotee of God. we can all examine our own lives and see the crazy things we get obsessed with, that we go to all sorts of troubles to acquire, and then think, well, golly, if I'd put that much effort into my spiritual efforts, maybe I would have realized God by now. So it's a good lesson. And we can also understand why people of all cultures paint beautiful pictures of their deities or their avatars. You go to the cathedrals in Europe and the beautiful stained glass windows picturing Jesus and Mother Mary and other saints. And so having beautiful images to look at is very attractive, and it makes religion attractive. And it doesn't matter that people in different cultures picture Jesus to look like them. That's a perfectly natural thing to do, according to this scripture that, or this logic that Swami Ramakrishnananda is giving us here. And so, likewise, Sri Krishna is pictured in these stories as an adorable youth. We already read the parts where he was an extremely adorable little child, and that, of course, is one of the attitudes that a devotee can take, where you picture yourself as being devoted to the baby Krishna or the baby Rama. And so similarly, you can picture yourself as a devotee of the pastoral Krishna. All right, so we have another paragraph coming up.
Now, therefore, suppose the devotee sees the beautiful form of his beloved. Can he ever imagine turning his eyes away from such beauty? Can he ever like to destroy that beautiful form of his and regard him as formless? No. As an insect gets infatuated by seeing the glory of a burning flame and would rather die in it than turn itself away from it, so the devotee also is once blessed with the sight of the divinely beautiful form of his God, can never imagine thinking him otherwise. He then does not care to know anything about your monism or qualified monism, dualism or pluralism, about your knower, knowledge, or known. All your isms and all your philosophies appear to him to be merely as much prattling. But he enjoys his beloved, forgetting all other concernments, even as a bee, sitting upon the bosom of a honey-laden flower, drinks the honey and forgets every other thing. He does not regard that form of his God as a means to an end, as a step to take him to the brink of shoreless and shapeless infinity, but as an end in itself. Therefore, he naturally regards his God either as his eternal master, or friend, or beloved. Nay, sometimes he looks towards him with an intense affection, such as that of a father or a mother towards his or her dearly beloved child.
So the more we can cultivate this devotional attitude, the easier it will be for our minds and hearts to become attached to him. That's the whole path of bhakti, is trying to find as many ways as possible to keep our minds on God. And the best way is to picture God in a form that's extremely attractive to you. And by so doing, you can keep your mind on God more and more, to the point where you don't want to give up that particular form. But have no fear. in the end, that form of God will lead you into the infinite formless realm, the realm of the infinite, undivided, unchanging Brahman. And so we don't need to feel like we're stopping short of the ultimate goal. We will be led there by the avatar or the deity or the incarnation. All right, let's read about the shepherdesses and shepherds of Vrindavan.
The shepherds and shepherdesses of Sri Vrindavan found such a God in their beloved Sri Krishna. They could not regard him as a human being on account of his supernatural actions, superhuman powers, and extraordinary beauty. So they naturally regarded him as nothing less than God. Yashoda and Nanda regarded this God as their sweet darling, the shepherd boys as their own sweet companion and friend, and the young shepherd girls could not help regarding him as their own beloved. The sages, who knew him to be an incarnation of God, regarded him as their master, while some others, knowing his inner self to be beyond the reach of all activities, either physical or mental, and therefore resting in eternal peace, gained eternal peace in him. Blessed were indeed the inhabitants of Sri Vrindavan, who had such an easily reachable God among them.
And so he's gone through all the different aspects of the bhakti tradition here, all the different possible relationships, or certainly many of the different possible relationships that one could have. So thinking yourself as the parent of the incarnation, thinking you as the friend and companion, thinking yourself as the lover of the incarnation. These are all the common ways of trying to think of the Lord and keeping the Lord with you. Certainly, we have the Christian example of Brother Lawrence, who thought of Jesus as his constant companion, even as he was washing the dishes in the kitchen. It was the only way he could spiritualize all the activities that he had to do in the monastery. And it turned out to be an extremely fruitful way at that. And so each of us can find that particular relationship. And it doesn't even need to necessarily be the same relationship through your entire life or through even your entire day. There might be times when you'd like to think of God as your companion, and other times when you might want to think of yourself as a parent taking care of a child. So we can even go back and forth and have these things fluid, because the incarnation embodies all of these different aspects. All right, so let's continue.
There are many Vaishnava philosophers who regard Sri Krishna to be the highest God, higher than Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. For they say that these latter gods have certain duties to do and such. They should be regarded as servants and not gods. And servants to whom? To Sri Krishna, who with flute in his hand merely sings away his time, leaving the duties of creating, preserving, and destroying to their hands. To the loving servants who surround a master, ever bear to see him working in their presence? The desire of a good servant is to see his master never troubled in any way. So how can the innumerable devotees who surround God ever bear to see their beloved bound in chains of duty? Hence, we must have to conclude that God is beyond all duties. And if that God ever does any work, it is simply playfully. This is the reason why these Vaishnava philosophers regard the Sri Krishna of Vrindavan as altogether different from the Sri Krishna of Mathura and Dvaraka, who is a worker and not a master, and therefore who is regarded as the incarnation of God, while the pastoral Sri Krishna is regarded by them as God himself.
So we're really raising this pastoral Krishna to the highest level. And of course, it doesn't matter how one thinks of it. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's the way that helps you the most. That's the most important thing. And there's reasons to think of God in all of these different ways. Of course, in karma yoga, we like to think of ourselves as instruments, and God is the doer of everything. So there's another way of looking at it, which is somewhat opposite of the way of thinking of yourself as the servant of God and doing everything so that God is not troubled by anything. So a very opposite kind of relationship. And yet it doesn't matter which one of those you take. Both of them will give you that attachment to God that is the necessary ingredient in the path of bhakti yoga. I think this next paragraph's really long. I'm just going to read the first part and you can read the second. How's that? Okay. Our hero was now in the prime of youth. Goddess beauty, charmed as it were, with his attractive person, resplendent with divine glory, wanted to make it her permanent abode, and so she left her various habitations, such as the full moon, the full-blown lotus, the smiling dawn, the dewy flowers, the variously colored rainbow, and the rippling and murmuring streamlets, the golden-plumed and sweet-singing birds, the pure and spotless hearts of the sages, and sundry other charming abodes, all of which were ashamed of themselves and completely put into the shade when they looked at the all-beautiful swain of Sri Vrindavan. So he's saying that the goddess beauty, who is embodied in all these beautiful things, wanted to make her permanent abode in Sri Krishna. So the beauty left all of these other things to be one with Sri Krishna. It is strange, then, that this irresistible charm of his person should win for him the hearts of all the young maidens of the place. They were really mad for him. There was in sweet Arcadia a shrine of the goddess Katyayani, who was celebrated for her infinite grace and mercy towards all her devotees, who used to get all their desires fulfilled through her. On one auspicious day, these maidens therefore naturally went to the shrine of the goddess, and each of them inwardly prayed to her that they might have the charming son of Nanda as their husband, and took the vow of fasting that whole day before her, and worshiping her with flowers and offerings. After fulfilling their vow in the evening, they all came in a group to the Yamuna to refresh themselves for the bath in her cool and limpid water. With the intentions, they took off all their clothes, kept them upon the bank, and went into the river, like so many Eves of Eden, as the place were perfectly solitary. They bathed and played in the water for a while, and in the gloom of twilight, all left the water and went to take their respective clothes. But alas, none of them was to be found there. So this is one of the famous stories. Also reminds one of how Christian nuns always think of themselves as the brides of Christ, a similar kind of attitude, but here we have a sort of a real-life drama being outplayed. So, Atma, tell us what these poor maidens did about their clothes.
They timidly gazed hither and thither. At last one of them cried that her own beloved, for whom she had fasted the whole day, had carried all their clothes away and climbed up a tree nearby. In shame, some of them went back to the water. Others requested, begged, and importuned him to return to them their clothes, as the night was fast approaching, and they must go back to their homes, so that their elders might not rebuke and scold them. At this, the rustic charmer smiled, and from his high place thus addressed them. I know, O ye girls, why you have fasted today, for nothing can be hidden from my view. To test your love towards me, I've done this unseemly deed, for which I hope you will forgive me. It is not mere playfulness that has induced me to take your clothes away from you, but an intense desire to teach you what it is to love. Love is complete self-forgetfulness. The lover should be so much filled up with his or her beloved that he or she should not have any other idea in his or her mind. How can the fear of shame, contumely, reproach, or scandal find any place in such a lover? Love is fully unselfish and therefore has nothing to do with carnality. I hope that you may be blessed with such a divine love towards me. And with this, he returned them their clothes and vanished.
Kind of reminds one of Adam and Eve, who had no shame about being naked in the Garden of Eden until they had eaten of the tree of good and evil against the injunctions. And really that's symbolic for them then knowing duality and knowing themselves as separate from God rather than knowing themselves as one with God. And so then they became ashamed of their nakedness and put on fig leaves. So the sort of the opposite story to this one, where Sri Krishna is telling them, don't be ashamed because your love for me has to transcend any kind of shame. All right, let's go on.
Some may ask why Sri Krishna selected such an awkward and unreasonable time to preach his short sermon on love to the shepherd girls. The 3rd chapter of Genesis, we find that when Adam and Eve were in their pristine purity before their fall, although they were really naked, still they did not appear to be naked and unseemly to each other. But as soon as they disobeyed their Father in heaven, allowed themselves to be led away by the wily temptations of the archenemy, and thus learned to split up their one idea of goodness into two, such as good and evil, seasonable and unseasonable, attractive and awkward, and so forth, then they thought fit to cover their naked bodies with big leaves of trees, that they might appear in a more becoming way before their Father. For at that time, even to think of going in their former childlike simplicity before the Most High brought the blush of shame on their countenance. Just before this, they were above all carnality, purer than even the gods. But when they lost that glory, they had to labor like all their future progeny, to most of whom, unfortunately, they bequeathed none of what they got from the Prince of Darkness than what they got from their legitimate and eternal Father. As Sri Krishna was above all ideas of carnality, he could do nothing which might bring shame to him. And as he wanted the shepherd girls to get the real love, which is above all sensual motive, and as their minds were at that time filled with an intense love towards himself, he rightly hoped that his words would be fully impressive and effective. So he is not in any way blamable for his conduct, which an ordinary man of the world could not but be culpable.
And it also just reminds me that in some peculiar sense, our Krishna is embodying both the trickster archetype and the hero archetype in all of these different stories. He likes to play little tricks on people and little games, and yet he's also the hero. And so he embodies all of the archetypal energies rather than just one. So he is the one who is the gateway. The trickster is often the one who is the gateway to the realms beyond, the realms that we don't ordinarily have access to. And you have to kind of fulfill the wishes of the trickster or be able to fulfill his tasks that he gives you or whatever in order to go beyond the gate. Many fairy tales and so forth, you have trickster characters that give tasks to the hero that they have to be able to perform in order to get to the next stage. So here Sri Krishna is sort of playing both roles of as the trickster and the hero. So, all right, let's read another paragraph or two.
On one autumnal night, when the full moon was raining showers of nectar upon the thirsty earth in the shape of her balmy rays, when a soft and mild breeze was engaged in carrying to him the sweet fragrance of fresh-blown flowers, when the murmuring Yamuna was singing sweetly all his divine glories, when the lilies opened their soft and white bosoms to be kissed by the wooing breeze, when the two soft-natured sisters, Sleep and Repose, had paid their nocturnal visits to almost half the population of Sri Vrindavan, Sri Krishna was sitting alone near the forest side on the bank of the Jamuna with his flute in hand. Seeing the beauty all around and excited by it, he began to play the sweetest tune on his flute. The willing breeze carried the soothing melodies everywhere. At last it brought them to the ears of the buxom shepherd girls, who were altogether maddened by them. One of the girls was suckling her child. She left it there upon the cradle, unmindful of its weeping, and ran to meet her beloved. Another was distributing food to her elders. She left her task partially done and ran out. The third was in her toilet room, and her toilet was only half finished. But regardless of her ludicrous state, she ran. The fourth was cooking for the family, and she left the food almost ready upon the oven and ran. The fifth was with her husband, and she left him on the bed and ran. In short, all young girls who ever heard that voice, in whatever condition they were, unmindful of that, maddened by the melodies, hastened towards the bank of the Jamuna, where they expected to see their beloved. Although their parents, brothers, elders, and husbands scolded and rebuked them for it, they did not care at all. Shame and reverence were sacrificed at the altar of an attraction that far exceeded all worldly considerations. Each one, when she was starting from her house, thought of meeting her beloved alone on the solitary and breezy bank of the Jamuna, pleasantly lighted by the balmy rays of the moon. But all of them met halfway, and in a group they at last reached the side of their beloved.
So that's quite a luscious picture that's being painted of this particular scene with all these extreme adjectives of beauty. You can imagine what a field day artist would have in painting such a picture of a scene like this, or what a musician might write as a song in order to picture this kind of devotional attitude among the young shepherdesses of Vrindavan. So it's really just to illustrate the strength of the power of the love that one wants to develop for the avatar. It's not meant to be taken quite as literally as one might think, but just to remember that that's the goal, is to find such an attraction in the incarnation that everything else seems to pale in importance to that. The flute, of course, is a symbol for being able to attract people from a distance. It's also indicating how Sri Krishna represents the musical symbolism of the universe, how the whole universe is made up of overtones of vibrational energies, and the flute is played with these sweet tones and creates all of these beautiful vibrational energies. And so the whole universe is created out of sound, and so Sri Krishna plays his flute much like Shiva would play his drum, or other images where the divine is creating the universe with sound. So we have time for maybe one more paragraph. It's a long chapter, so we're still quite much into the middle of it. So let's read one more at least.
When in that late hour of night, Sri Krishna saw all the young girls of Raja, another name for Sri Vrindavan, assembled round him, he was put into a very false position. But at last he thought that perhaps some fresh calamity had befallen the shepherds, and for that reason they had come to ask his help. So he asked them why at that late hour they had come there, and also inquired if, attracted by the sweet sound of his flute, they had come to see and hear him play. But seeing no sign of anxiety in their faces, which must have been there had there been any real calamity, he concluded that it must be the melody of his flute, as well as his personal beauty, that had caused them to leave their homes at such a late hour. So he reprimanded them for taking undue liberty with their husbands and elders, and exhorted them to love and honor their partners in life, to look after their children, to serve their superiors, and mind all their household duties. He also told them that even if one's husband be blind or lame or dumb, or even a leper, he should be served, respected, and loved by all chaste women, if they desired eternal bliss hereafter. So he wanted them to go home.
So that's an important lesson. And as I said, we're not to take this literally, that we're all supposed to drop all of our duties and only run after the avatar. We have to see the incarnation. We have to see God in all beings. So if you're in a position to serve an aged parent, or to serve your family members, or to take care of your children, or whatever the particular household situation is that you have, might even be taking care of a garden or taking care of pets. All of those activities have to be seen as a form of worship of the divine, because the divine is in all of those other beings. And so the lesson here is don't give up your duties, but spiritualize your duties, and keep your mind on God while you're doing your duties and seeing God manifest in all of these. Now, as another side note, we saw similar kinds of intense love for Sri Ramakrishna in some of his disciples, where they had to really go against the wishes of their parents in order to go visit Sri Ramakrishna, who was considered somewhat of a madman, something that the ordinary householder might not understand at all if they were more concerned about having grandchildren and somebody taking care of them. They couldn't understand why their young boys were going to see this person at the Kali temple. But they went anyway, because the attraction of Sri Ramakrishna was so great. But Sri Ramakrishna would also sometimes counsel them that they needed to make sure that they took care of their parents before they came to see him, that they were not to shirk their duties. That is just about our time, so we will continue this next time. And so we will close with a chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace. Kind of reminds one of Orpheus and the Pied Piper. All sorts of people play flutes to bring people